The Woolen Mills neighborhood has had a very interesting, albeit difficult, transition into the modern age. Over the past 50 years, there have been tremendous pressures on the neighborhood. Among the causes have been the following: the upheaval caused by annexation and the accompanying imposition of poor zoning practices, pressures from within as existing industrial uses sought to expand their operations, the neighborhood being squeezed between the wastewater treatment plant, composting yard, and sewage pumping station that grew up around it, pressures from outside development interests and city-county planners to conform to their views of what a formerly industrial neighborhood should be. The annexation procedure began in 1958, and an unfortunate end result was that one of the oldest portions comprising the heart of the neighborhood was left behind in the county. This portion held the mill itself, as well as the mill office building, and the series of 3 Gothic duplexes along East Market Street. Up on the hill, the area consisting of Piraeus Row, Henry Clay Marchant's house, and the former park that Marchant created for Woolen Mills workers and their families also remained in the county. We've not been able to discover the reasons why the neighborhood was divided in this manner, but it's likely that the railroad track was employed as a partial guiding line. Whatever the reasoning, it's obvious that this decision was made without considering the neighborhood holistically. The multi-jurisdictional split resulting in the majority of the neighborhood being located in the city and a smaller portion being located in the Scottsville district of the county has not served the Woolen Mills well. In the meantime, a field containing a few junked cars morphed into a full-blown junkyard and brownfield. A modest wastewater treatment plant grew into a 75-acre complex serving an ever-expanding county, urban ring, city, and university. In place of Marchant's Park and Ball Field, an industrial park appeared, bringing prefab metal buildings and truck traffic. A culvert that was once used as a cow path turned into a 1,600 vehicle per day street that now has an astounding 74% cut-through rate. That means that almost 3/4 of the traffic that rolls through that small stretch every day comes from outside the Woolen Mills and Belmont neighborhoods. This has often caused dramatic impacts on the neighborhood's streets and adjoining properties. A prime example of short-sighted zoning practice is exemplified by what occurred on the hilltop following the closing of the mill. Henry Clay Marchant's antebellum house, with its detached kitchen and surrounding property, were known as Piraeus back in the 19th century. Unfortunately, the general public in Charlottesville isn't aware of Marchant's prominence and his important role in helping the area recover financially after the Civil War. The father of the Woolen Mills Village, he was renowned for his fine character. For his day, Marchant was a very forward-thinking boss. Rather than living apart from his own mill workers, in posher downtown Charlottesville, for instance, he lived amongst them. At the request of his workers during the Methodist revival in the 1880s, he enabled the Union Chapel to be built. He offered food and heating fuel to them at wholesale rates. He purchased the lots fronting Riverview Cemetery so that his employees and their families would have unrestricted access from the neighborhood in perpetuity. When considering today's cutthroat corporate climate, the following statement of Marchant's offers a much kinder and gentler worldview. The property of a manufacturing company must ultimately rest on the efficiency and fidelity of its labor. It must be impaired by whatever impairs the comfort and morale of its operatives. It must be promoted by whatever promotes their self-respect, elevates their character, and cultivates local attachments and the home feeling. So it was with great dismay that we discovered that that entire part of the neighborhood, Marchant's beautiful house, the former park, and the adjacent historic houses on Piraeus Row had all been zoned as light industrial by the county in the late 1970s. As mentioned previously, they also rezoned the historic duplexes on East Market Street. This was all done as a fait accompli during the creation of the county's comprehensive plan, and the residents of these homes were neither warned nor asked for their input on the matter. The county's intention was to force this area in the direction of becoming an industrial park, and they were all too willing to sacrifice the historic houses and landscape to achieve their goal. The out-of-place zoning exists to this day. Conversely, just across the tracks in the city portion of the neighborhood, the remains of the steam plant and smokestack are zoned residential. In the meantime, back in the city portion of the Woolen Mills, efforts began to fight some of the more deleterious effects of poor zoning practices. After the 1960s annexation, a band of industrial zoning was laid across the back portions of the deep lots that ran from East Market Street back to the railroad tracks. Splitting parcels into residential and industrial sections has never been considered sound zoning practice, but they did it nonetheless, once again without consulting the residents. Beginning in the late 1970s, residents started approaching City Council and the Planning Commission, petitioning for relief from cut-through traffic, sewage odors, and industrial blight with mixed results. Plans were hatched by a developer with the blessing of the city to create a massive truck transfer station on the farmland behind the historic Timberlake Branham House on East Market Street. The neighborhood, aided by a residents' lawsuit, fought hard. Fortunately, the project was never built. This property was again in the news as the subject of the taking by typo lawsuit filed against the city several years ago. Among the many supportive letters received by the city during that suit was an encouraging note from a Woolen Mills fan, the author Annie Dillard. Several years ago, we convinced the Rivanna Water and Sewer Authority to cease composting human waste in close proximity to our homes. The composting, along with a lack of maintenance and necessary upgrades at the treatment plant, had caused the Woolen Mills, along with Belmont Carlton, to be referred to as the stinky neighborhoods. More recently, we've been at the center of the storm regarding the RWSA's efforts to place an enormous 3-story sewage pumping station in our midst. With the help of the city, we were successful in getting the station moved out of the neighborhood and onto the RWSA's own property. We finally have reason to be optimistic that those particular negative effects will be a thing of the past. A significant and chronic problem has been one of perception by both the city and county. The Woolen Mills was a village that grew around industry, but it was an industry that had a symbiotic and healthy relationship with the neighborhood and also had a human touch in the form of Henry Clay Marchant. It was one that employed the villagers and ensured that their children were fed, clothed, and educated. The villagers laughed, cried, intermarried, and grew old together. Unfortunately, over the last 50 years, the term industry has been skewed in order to justify the creation and expansion of blight in the neighborhood. In the past, the Woolen Mills industrial buildings were attractive, designed by architects, surrounded by trees, and gardens were encouraged to flourish. Today, streams have been covered over, and we have acres of asphalt and heat islands, resulting in a tremendous amount of runoff. The existing businesses are owned by people outside of the neighborhood and don't employ any of the residents. In actuality, there's absolutely no comparison between the Woolen Mills Manufacturing Company and the businesses of today. Yet the misperception continues to be put forth as an excuse to continue harmful zoning practices. Over the past decade, the neighborhood has earned a reputation as a place that has made a conscious decision to both define and protect itself. The residents have become less complacent and more politically savvy. Young and old, they've found their power. In 2007, the Woolen Mills was chosen by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources as the place where they wanted to invest the energy and expertise of their staff to do the survey necessary to begin the nomination process for a historic district. The excitement they felt while researching a surviving Virginia mill village was contagious. Over the following 2 years, the Woolen Mills Village, state, and federal historic district status was conferred. The Woolen Mills has always been a proudly agrarian neighborhood, a tradition that continues to this day. Pressure has already started to come from density advocates and infill proponents who would rather see our deep lots packed with buildings rather than tomatoes, sunflowers, and trees. Perhaps one day the unbuffered blighted areas in Brownfield will be redeveloped. But what form will that redevelopment take? Will the powers that be see our neighborhood as we see it, and will we share that common vision? We see ourselves as the historic Woolen Mills Village, a special place next to the river that gave birth to us. We're grateful to the many folks who came before us, made this place possible, and cared deeply about it. They called themselves the Woolies, and we answer to that name as well.